Our next fireside chat, something that everybody have their eyes on. India 2047, next 25 years of Indian ICT. We have two very esteemed speakers who will share their perspective on the future of information and communication technology in India. My first speaker for this session, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder and executive vice chairman, InfoEdge. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, a prominent entrepreneur, founder of InfoEdge, the parent company of popular platforms like Naukri.com, Jeevan Sathi, and many real estate and education portals. With his vast experience in the industry, Sanjeev will provide insights into the future of ICT in India and its potential to shape the nation's growth. My next panelist for this session, CP Gurnani, CEO, Tech Mahindra. With his extensive knowledge and experience in the technology sector, CP Gurnani will discuss the emerging trends and opportunities that will shape the Indian ICT landscape over the next 25 years. The Fireside Chat will be moderated by Sunil Rajguru, editor of Dataquest, PCQuest, and CiOL. His deep understanding of technology industry and his insights will ensure a thought-provoking and engaging conversation. During this Fireside Chat, we will explore the vision and possibilities of technologies that can be looked into, policy framework for the Indian ICT sector over the next 25 years. Over to you, Sunil.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. So it's a very rare privilege for me to do a fireside chat of two such legends. And I think between them, they have enough wisdom to guide a nation. So today, I want to speak as less as possible, and I want to listen. So I'll just get straight to it. India's biggest success story has been IT services. So everyone knows the history. It began in the Y2K movement, and till 2019, we were the leading IT services superpower. And during COVID, it became even stronger. But there has been a certain derogatory, your cyber coolies, your just services, you're not products. So there are many aspects to that. One is most of the leaders tell me they are no longer IT services, they are IT consultants. So can we become an IT consultants to the world, IT consultant superpower? Is there such a thing? Maybe.
Thank you, Sunil. And I think Sunil was just being polite when he says two legends. He wanted to basically say two old men. No, but Sanjeev is much younger. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
No. Only 5 years ago. Only 5 years ago.
And the tongue-in-cheek statement that he made outside was two Sindhis.
I'll just, before I become the villain, I'll just qualify on that. He said, you're the first person in the world to bring these two Sindhis together. And my mother-in-law is a Sindhi, and my wife said exactly the same thing when she heard about the panel. So let me give you the full context. Anyway.
From my perspective, one is I just don't know why would you create a class between consulting and services.
Right.
I genuinely believe it is the wrong classification.
Okay.
Number two, a sector which deploys about 5 million people, a sector which has created about $250 billion of exports. Right. And as somebody pointed out, the export of Indian IT services is more than what Saudi exports oil.
Absolutely.
So I think we should be very proud of it.
Absolutely.
Now the second point, which is really about what has benefited the IT services sector, which is clearly, some people call it education, but I say there were three mantras to it. Number one, focus on B2B. Number two is focus on being relevant. It didn't matter what technology was being, relevant or the momentum was taking us to. And number third is being ahead of the game not only just being relevant, but being ahead of the game. So, you know, people talked about COVID, work from home. We made it a reality in literally 30 hours. So I think if we can remain that agile, I think Tech Mahindra IT services, again, has to remember B2B is all about relationship and trust. Being relevant means you are making sure that your customers win. And number third, being ahead of the curve means you adopt, embrace technology of tomorrow. I think Indian IT is well equipped for it, and 250 billion hopefully will become a trillion, and I'm very confident about it.
Yeah, thank you.
So first of all, I'm not a techie.
Right.
I did not study engineering in college. I've never worked as a programmer or engineer, right? I studied economics in college, but I have founded a tech company and we have invested in several other tech companies. So I've been part of the movement. Now, when I look at the Indian IT industry, right, you've got to understand that almost everybody in the Indian IT industry is super smart. They're really intelligent. They can adapt. They can get ahead of the curve. And we have seen that on more than one occasion. Right? I remember in the NASSCOM, I think the executive council at Kumaram, McKinsey had come to present and they said, you guys are toast. The model is changing, the world is going digital, we're getting productized. As services companies, you will not be able to compete. Right? Now, that is perhaps a little alarmist, but but yes, it was challenging. The models were evolving. And they said, look, your competitive advantage of having massive headcount, large number of engineers is going to go away as the sector productizes and gets platforms. Because then you don't need 3,000 engineers to solve the problem. 300 mein ho jayega. Or 300 means East Europe can do it, Latin America can do it, South America can do it. Right? That was what McKinsey said. But you look at how the Indian IT companies adapted. Right? And it's because they have super smart people. So I think it's the human capital in the Indian IT industry that makes a difference. Right? And it is its birth is entrepreneurial, the industries. But if you're very smart people and they're entrepreneurial, they're going to figure it out. So I don't see, one to ho jayega.
Okay, yeah. So actually, at Dataquest, we have been the biggest champions of the IT services industry. And this criticism mostly I read in the foreign press. So I'm really thank you for your...
No, but I'll tell you one thing. This whole business of, tum to keval B2B karte ho, services karte ho, product nahi karte ho,
that is
cyber
what I hear.
You see, products, and consumer products especially, will be conceived and created where the consumer is.
Right.
Okay? So products for India will be conceived and created by Indian companies in India because the customer is here. Products for the US market will be conceived and created by companies who are based in the US. That's the reality. But that does not mean that IT services is not a good business. It's a great business.
Sanjeev, I would like to add a little bit. World's largest airline is Emirates Airline. You have never told them that go and manufacture aircrafts.
Right.
So if my business is services, allow me to grow in services. Why do you want me to be in products?
Absolutely. Understood. So there's another question related to that. So, because you talked of making products here. So what will it take for India to become a product and app nation? In short, make in India for make for the world. Now, and I heard, Sam Altman, you pointed out, Sam Altman was asked about India and ChatGPT, and he's saying India will never be able to create a ChatGPT. So, that is the kind of arrogance that is coming from there.
Look, let me put it this way.
Yeah.
Why is Silicon Valley Silicon Valley?
Right.
Okay? It's because there's a very large local market. The US is the largest market in the world. Right? And therefore, a lot of capital congregates there. Yeah. A lot of capital congregates there and invests in companies in the valley. It's okay now? Yeah. It invests, that capital goes into those companies and they create products for the US market first and subsequently global markets. And the payoffs are therefore larger because of a larger market. Now, as the Indian economy grows over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right, you will find that companies will be built out of India for India, right? Because the payoffs will be larger, they will be able to attract that kind of capital, right? Now, without that kind of capital, can you build a chat GPT? The truth is it's hard. Okay? We're not going to deploy that kind of capital. Do we have those many engineers of that caliber, doing this stuff? Answer is no. But if you have the capital, they can come. Right? But what does India have? India has got 1.4 billion people. So India has data. Because when these people use stuff, you get data. Right? And intelligence is software plus data. Right? So what can India do with its data, right, which will enable companies to be built? May not be to compete with ChatGPT immediately, but enough stuff can be done.
Okay.
And it's not as if Sam Altman knows a lot about India. I mean, पहले कितनी बार आया वो? But very often American CEOs will put out stuff like this, that तुम पे कुछ भी नहीं हो.
Yeah.
That's bluff and bluster very often,
Right.
without that much knowledge.
You would like to add to that?
About Sam Altman or?
Anything, what is it? Yeah, why not?
So again, I saw the same video clip as most of you have seen, where Rajan asked this question, which was innocent question. And I think this is clearly Sam Altman, has forgotten that it has taken him $10 billion to get to this point.
Right.
It didn't happen overnight. So that is number one. Number two is, so if we put $10 billion behind anything, I mean, we have shown it. I mean, he didn't create a UPI, he didn't create an Aadhaar, he didn't create a mission to the Mars. I mean, all of this. And look at it, they were all done at 1/10 or 1/15 or 1/30th of the cost.
Yeah.
So I frankly couldn't agree more with Sanjeev that limited knowledge and a very loud statement. The second part is, the reality is that ChatGPT is not the only generative AI. I mean, it is just happens to be the first off the block, but many other ChatGPTs or generative AIs are following suit. And like in any other business, even in this business, the competition will become a reality. And third is, it is not that AI is an answer.
Right.
It's actually more of a human intelligence plus artificial intelligence is equal to applied intelligence.
Right.
And where 1.4 billion Indians are applying, I mean, please be rest assured that better products, better platforms, better services would be born.
Yeah, got it. So I think because we had that theme in the morning, we are already the world's largest democracy. We have UPI, we have Aadhaar. In fact, as a digital democracy, we are way ahead of the United States.
So you talk to anybody who visits from Europe or the US, and they come here and they see a UPI in action, or Indian fintech in action, they are amazed.
Yeah.
So the stuff we've done ground up to solve Indian problems, I think some of that is fairly unique and pretty much world beating.
Yeah. So I think I'll.
So if you talk to people in the government, I mean, they are thinking seriously of how UPI and other digital infrastructure that has been developed that can be exported around the world into emerging markets, and that could be India's export to the world, and therefore, while China may be going and spending billions of dollars doing infrastructure, India can spend a lot less and do digital infrastructure, and therefore make an impact on the world.
Yeah, we are already the leader in digital goods in the world, if you see. We've already reached there. So another important thing in the journey forward is probably the startup ecosystem. So we are already the third largest ecosystem. So simple question, what will it take to us to become the largest? I'll start with you, Mr. Bikhchandani, because Mr. Gurnani pointed out that like others, have a failure rate of 90%. At least you strive to have a success rate of 90%. So your approach would be.
Now, depends how you measure it. Is
Right.
it number of startups? Is it amount of capital? Is it market cap created? Is it, what is it? Or is it sales revenue and profit? I think to be the largest, which means you're ahead of Silicon Valley,
Yes.
it will be hard in the short run.
I see.
You should just strive to compete with yourself and do what is required for India. Okay, and whatever the outcome is, it is. But I do think there are going to be 4 or 5 things that will drive the Indian startup ecosystem in the next several years, maybe a couple of decades. I think first is, of course, talent. Right? I think there we have a lot of talent. Okay, because and second is people trying to be entrepreneurs. Very large numbers are trying, and that makes, so very large number of talented people are trying. So if you look at, I mean, CP, when, you were in college, or I was in college, or many of us who are in the 40s or 50s when we went to school and college, if you managed to get into an IIT or an IIM, it was rare that your aspiration was to be an entrepreneur. Right? So today, when you go to an IIT or an IIM, right, maybe 30-40% of the graduates or the students there want to be entrepreneurs. And we are seeing that reflected in the startup ecosystem. So a lot of talent, a lot of the talent wants to be entrepreneurs. Number 3, there is enough capital available. Right? Notwithstanding the current funding winter, there is enough capital available. Number 4, local markets are being created. Right? Number 5, the government has done, I think, huge work with UPI, with the health stack, now with ONDC. The kind of digital infrastructure out there, okay, the mobile telephone expansion, that's huge. Number 6 is regulatory environment. Right? These are 5 or 6 things that will drive the startup ecosystem going forward, and I don't see it stopping. Right? Now, whether we become number 1, number 2, dekhi jayegi. Do your thing.
Sunil, I just want to add my perspective on this. When we all started talking about a $5 trillion economy, there were enough skeptics. Yeah. Now when we said 2047, now I don't know what the official numbers are because I have heard 2 speeches. One said $40 trillion economy and one said $35 trillion economy. Right. I know for anybody to visualize a 35 or a $40 trillion economy looks very difficult when you're sitting at 3.2 or 3.6 right now. My point here is that if you put all of these sigmas together, you would realize that the biggest contribution will come from the startup ecosystem. Right. And that startup ecosystem is being enabled by the digital infrastructure. I mean, there is no second thought about it. Yeah. The reality is no Uber would succeed if there was no telecom infrastructure.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't run an Uber, you can't run a Zomato, you cannot run most of these location-based services if you do not have a decent telecom infrastructure. Yeah. And that reality is when the world has even just about adopted 5G and the penetration of 5G is less than 20%, you have a task force which is worried about, which is taking care of 6G.
Right.
So I think as long as we want to stay one step ahead, in my opinion, that 35 to $40 trillion of economy in 2047 is doable.
Great, that's fantastic. So, looking at a lot of things what you said, like I remember in the 80s, used to say government kuch kaam nahi kar rahi, ye nahi ho raha, wo nahi ho raha. But now I'm finding that we are firing on all cylinders, like IT services industry is doing great, Digital India is doing great, startup is growing. So are we firing on all cylinders? Are we on track? But what more needs to be done?
I would like to say The day we start accepting everything is going well, then I think that is the beginning of a stagnation.
Right.
So from my perspective, from where I sit, reality is there are 3 or 4 areas where I think we are underinvested as a country. Number one is on our education system.
Right.
Uh, you know, Sanjeev is the founder of Ashoka University. I am a founder of Plaksha University, but we are not solving the big problem that the world has. So the reality is that our education system is still based on, if you want to join St. Stephen's, you have to have 99% marks or 99.99. But if you want to become an engineer, you can become at 60%. Now, there is obviously a gap. And that gap, only Ashoka and Plaksha can't resolve it. That means there is a lot more to be done for the talent to take us to that 35 to 40 trillion.
Right.
So that is number one that I would like to emphasize. Number two, my belief is that for the size of economy that we want to be, I think we are underinvested in R&D. I mean, both of us would like to reaffirm that the number of smart people who want to do PhD is small. Number of smart people who want to be professors or teachers is relatively small. Number of industry, academia, research happening is very small. Unless we correct that equation, the perfect processes are when the talent, technology, and the future businesses all work together. And when Sanjeev was giving us examples of why Valley has succeeded, I think this was an important point that we should amplify a little more.
No, I think we're getting there, but as CP pointed out, there are some gaps. I think what is important is that people are now more and more conscious of how important startups are to India's growth and future. So I graduated from college in 1984 and took up my first job in an ad agency in Delhi. And if I look back to 1984, which is, whatever, 39 years ago, and now, there's been a sea change in business environment, industry, right? It's not been a revolution, it's been an evolution, right? Although when you look back on it and you just do a point-to-point comparison, it looks like a revolution, okay? But if you look at where the buzz, investment, growth in employment, all that has come, it's largely come from companies and industries that did not even exist or barely existed in 1984. IT services barely existed. IT-enabled services did not exist. Mobile telephony did not exist. Internet did not exist. Mobile apps, therefore, did not exist. Private sector airlines did not exist. Private sector banks did not exist. Private sector infrastructure did not exist. You name it, those companies and industries did not exist. Right? And therefore, all this change has been driven by new companies, very often startups by first-generation entrepreneurs. So you can have a startup by an established company, which is, let's say, a TCS, right? It's still a startup. It's a diversification. It's not a first-gen entrepreneur. Or you can have a startup by, it's like an HCL or an Infosys, first-generation entrepreneurs, right? But the startups of today are the giant companies of tomorrow. And what has happened is that this government recognizes this importance, and therefore Startup India. Therefore, this whole emphasis on startups. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. Mr. Gurnani, you want to add to that, or?
I just hope he had mentioned Mahindra's also, because because Mahindra's was also a startup of 75 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I hope he drives in a Mahindra SUV, and clearly it is giving run for money to all his American friends.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
I just wanted him to acknowledge that also.
So I have read about the history of Mahindra and Mahindra. And it's very fascinating. It was Mohammed and Mahindra, right? Initially.
Mohammed and Mahindra.
Yeah, before
No, the
Mahindra.
only reason I'm emphasizing is that in 84, there was, when in 84 probably Maruti had
83.
just
83 launched.
I mean, you did have a Maruti, but beyond that, there was no other vehicle. And today, a Ford or a General Motors is actually leaving the market because Indians are being so competitive. So I think, yes, I mean, wherever we have shown ambition, we have delivered.
Absolutely. So out of you talk, I just want to pick one R&D because like we have been following all the parameters, we are rising in everything, startups, IT services, we are the leaders. But somehow R&D, whichever chart, parameter, we are languishing way
I
beyond
think if you look at individual companies, there are companies doing great work.
Right.
Now I'll mention Mahindra. I think Mahindra is doing great work in automobile R&D.
Okay.
As is Tata Motors.
Okay.
Right? Indian companies, both of them. So company after company, many have realized and are trying to spend more and invest more. And results are being delivered, but you're right, it's not in every company.
Yeah. But still from
But a lot of R&D in the US happens in universities, funded by the government.
that's what I was saying.
And that percolates to industry. I think there isn't enough of that in India.
Yeah, because R&D has to be in the government institutes, in educational institutes and industries. So where are we?
So again, Sunil, I think it is like mission to the moon that, Kennedy had announced.
Right.
I mean, the reality is that we did assume that we have a mission to create our own aircraft.
Right.
We have a mission to create our own fighter jet. A country like Sweden has a fighter jet.
Yes.
Now, it only shows is that we probably not in certain areas. Like for example, in defense, I mean, we all know that there is a lot of indigenization that is happening. But have we created a North Star goal for ourselves? I think the day we start creating those North Star goals, I mean, I'm sure we will start seeing the funding flowing into the R&D. We will start seeing a better alignment happening. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure, Sanjeev can give better data, but industry contribution towards research into the academic institutes is practically zilch. I mean, you can make fund a university by executive development programs. You can fund it by fellowships, you can fund it by fees, and you can fund it by philanthropy, but you don't fund it by industry contributing towards joint research. I mean, you will have better data.
Well, that's true. I think there's a silo of academics and professors doing research, and industry is a separate silo. And there isn't enough, crossover. I think that needs to change. But I think if you look at what some of the incubators in the IITs are doing, and the NITs, and it's beginning. So IIT Madras is doing good work, Kanpur is doing good work, Delhi is doing good work, Bombay is doing good work. That I know of. So it's beginning to happen, but that's more again in the startup space as opposed to established companies, large companies, depending on institutes of technology for R&D.
So I think it's like you just made a statement some time back, evolution, not revolution. So even if the evolution continues for the next indefinite, it'll be a great thing.
But in a lot of ways, certain areas. For example, I mean, I'm very proud of that an Indian vaccine was able to withstand all global vaccines and continued to prove itself under various derivatives or variances. So I think what Dr. Krishna Aila and his wife achieved, and obviously with the government help, I mean, it has worked out very, very well.
Right.
Similarly, I think in our provider space, I mean, Arun has just walked in and he was sharing with us that Dr. Devi Shetty is looking at, in a way, taking out, uh, some of the middlemen in the provider market. Now, my point is very simple, that at one point of time, if anybody who was worth something, if he wanted a treatment, he ran to, one of these bigger institutes in US. Today, my belief is that in a provider, in a hospital space, India has actually created some of the world's best institutions.
Absolutely.
So I think it's just a matter of deciding the priorities and attacking those priorities, or adding value to those priorities. I think that's really what is required, and I think the more think tank like yours can come up and help us create priorities, it will help.
Definitely. So, yeah. Ask questions. Yeah, I think I think they'll be eagerly waiting. Yeah. So maybe a couple of questions. Mike, can you please give the mic?
My name is Vimal Vaklam. Actually, coming back to the first question you started with, was about that cyber coolie tag, which some people are trying to attach. Now, here I want to mention, the reason for that is, people also quote the example of the British Army in India. British Army in India had all the Indians, and people say that if they had fought for India, India would have been free 2 centuries back. So right now also, all people, all the big techs internationally, they employ Indians for R&D, and in India itself, in Chennai, and then resell those products to us here in India at exorbitant prices. Why can't we indigenously develop an ecosystem wherein we play that role? Because the foot soldiers are in India.
One is, I'm not denying that your statement is correct, that the soldiers are Indians. In many cases, now you can also say the generals are Indians. I mean, there are 20 companies where the CEOs are Indians. So it's no longer just about foot soldiers. But I genuinely believe that there are certain countries which do a better job of creating solutions faster. For example, Israel. It doesn't matter whether we are the third largest, fifth largest, or largest in startup ecosystem. The number of companies in the tech world that are born in Israel and that get listed in the New York Stock Exchange, is phenomenally much higher than we have. I don't have the data right now, but I know that it's like almost every university produces at least 10 or 12 of these listings in New York Stock Exchange. So, in general, I would say set your ambition right. For example, we're talking about defense. We don't have a platform which is indigenously developed for cybersecurity for India. Now, you may say it's the soldiers which have developed it, and the CEO of Palo Alto Networks is Nikesh Arora. Or, every second company will have Indian CEOs or Indian engineers. But I think once we set the aspiration, we probably will get there. Till we set the aspiration, we will, and I'm not saying we are not making progress. We are making definitive progress, but at a global scale, I think Sanjeev has covered it. When our consumption increases, now we export about 300 billion of hardware plus software, right? India's total demand of hardware plus software is less than 50 billion. Now that effectively means is, if our consumption increases, obviously the products in India would be born in India, for India, and that, I promise you, Indians have been doing it, which Sam Altman did not know. India has been doing it for 5,000 years, where our people have globalized, our agriculture got globalized, and our entrepreneurship have globalized. That old saying that wherever you can find a potato, you will also find an Indian entrepreneur. I don't think that has been forgotten.
Absolutely.
Yeah, look, it's already happening. Now, CP, tell me, let's take 3 or 4 companies. Let's take TCS, let's take Infosys, let's take HCL, and let's take Mahindra, right? Now, 30 years ago, 30 or 40 years ago, when the IT service industry was very young, would you have imagined these 4 giant companies would come out of India, be Indian-owned, be listed in India, right? And if you take the top 10 services companies in the world by market cap, I think these 4 will find themselves there in that list, right? It's already happening. Now, what happens when foreign companies come and they hire Indian engineers and make them work over here on their products? They train our human capital. They train our people. Many of these people go out and found companies, or they work for Indian startups or work for Indian companies. That is knowledge transfer. You may keep your patents, but what's in the guy's head and what his capabilities are walks out of the door when he switches a job or he does his own startup. So if you look at, the startups that are being founded or the startups that are getting engineering talent, where is that talent coming from? Very often from companies that were established, where these guys got trained and they walked out. And that's how it's happening. It will continue to happen. And there will be giant Indian companies coming out of this process eventually.
Probably that's the difference between India and China, because Chinese, they go back and create an ecosystem in China wherein, they are challenging the US tech companies for everything.
Look, I think it's happening in India, and in China is a larger market, right? China's got more capital, but it's happening in India, it's happening rather well.
Maybe another question.
I'm really thankful to Sanjeev sir for his wonderful opinion, and Gurnani sir, thank you. I'm myself Dr. Amit Gautam from Maharaja Agras Institute of Technology. I've been into corporate for many years. From last 8 years, I'm in looking after the placements of the BTech and MBA students. So frankly speaking, it's easy to target colleges, universities, institutes, and schools in India especially when we see that there is not even a single hand holding apart from big IITs, where by default government is funding everything to these institutes. Obviously they have to, no issue, but in majority of the cases, IITs are being funded by government through various projects, through various resources. So in majority of the colleges, institutes doesn't have any availability or hand holding from the corporates, neither from the government, and they are the easy target because they don't have representation at the podium, at the big stages like this or somewhere else. And if we can have CSR, like corporate social responsibility, why can't we mandate to have a corporate institute responsibility where certain revenue percentage need to be funded, whether through the research or through other means? Because if, frankly speaking, I'm reaching out to many corporates, big corporates.
Can you just ask the question, because you don't have time. Yeah.
My question is, I'm starting with the question. I'm reaching out to the corporates for funding and all those things, but not even a single corporate. And it's easy for them to say that, they are not doing their part of job. So what to do in this regard? That's my point.
So again, I'm just taking a step back. Collective philanthropy, you saw ISB, right? Collective philanthropy, though, Sanjeev was a major contributor as a founder of Ashoka University, but it was a collective philanthropy. Plaksha I've already shared. Now, in terms of corporates funding university, Mahindra University is clearly an example. I mean, educational institutes, if you want to do it at a scale, Sanjeev will tell you, I don't know, Ashoka is now what, almost 17, 16 years?
Well,
It doesn't
2009,
matter.
2009 was the first one.
Yeah, so 14, 15 years, whatever. Point is that even today, it requires funding.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that means if you want to build an institute of real eminence, then you should be prepared for 50 years of build-up. It is not one day of build-up. That is the point I'm trying to make. And it is not that corporates are not interested in doing it. So Mahindra University is just an example. Now the third part is your own university. Question is, how do you take a parallel? If there is a very big institute anywhere in the world, it is actually gets funded by the endowment of the students, alumni, right? Now, if that endowment alumni, if you are building from that perspective, I promise you 50 years or 30 years later, you would say, I have an endowment which does not require, because who are your alumni? They represent industry, they represent research, they represent science and technology, they also represent their own children who will be studying in your university. So my request is, A, ask, you will get help, and number two, invest in your alumni, you will ultimately see an ecosystem being developed.
I have a suggestion to make,
We are out of time, so I'm sorry. So we are out of time. So since the theme of is India 2047, I'd just like your quick conclusion. Our journey in the next 25 years, what are we getting right? What are we getting totally wrong? What more we have to do?
I think what is working for us is large young population, aspirational, dynamic, ambitious, wanting to make it happen, right? The entrepreneurs who are doing startups, their quality, their ambition, their goals. So when I compare the startup entrepreneurs I meet today to where I was in 1990 when I quit my job, they are streets ahead. They're smarter. They're much smarter than me. They're much, much more ambitious. And they will do much bigger things. And they'll do them faster. I think we're getting the people thing right, by and large, I think.
My biggest challenge today is that Sunil covered so much of distance in his few, Sanjeev covered so much of distance in his few words that I have to really struggle to say, what do I add more? So I can only say is that, Sanjeev, if I were to say that when I travel around the world, I sometimes worry is that there is a cockiness and arrogance coming in India Incorporated. Because we are growing at 5.56%, rest of the world is at 0.2%. I mean, there is this, which is what I worry about. So that's why I said, add to your points,
I agree with you.
So that is number one. I mean, what has worked well for us is our humility, our desire to succeed. I mean, I don't think we can afford to be arrogant. We still have miles and miles to go. And second is, from my perspective, our biggest strength is talent, but my feeling is that a talent that is required for tomorrow is not just technology. It is technology plus domain. And I believe that all of us who have some influence and impact will have to take in account that left brain and right brain have to work together. So if we can focus on talent, but also realize that it is left brain and right brain both working together.
Fantastic. So I think this has been the most immersive and fascinating discussion I've been in, and the audience has a lot of food for thought. We'll be thinking for many days. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.